Right, well, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to our final session, which is the big debate, the discussion. I just want to be quite clear what we're trying to achieve here. We're not going to solve all of the problems of gender today. So I don't think we should set ourselves that target. But what I would like to do is try and make a little bit of progress on this by starting to identify what's important and what isn't. We've heard an enormous amount today, and some of the issues identified, I am convinced, are red herrings. They are misleading. If we spend time on them, we are going to waste our time, and there are other things we can do that will actually have a greater impact. So some of the questions I want to explore is which of these things are a waste of time, and which of these things are actually worth spending time on. So, for instance, we had a quick discussion about engagement, didn't we? Boys not engaged in Mauritius with low attainment, is that a challenge? And then we heard from Australia, high engagement in school and still low attainment. So do we draw from that, I'm putting this out as a question, you may want to start thinking about this, the level of engagement doesn't matter because you get the same results anyway, and can we spend our time, better use of our time, somewhere else? Student preferences we touched on, whether consciously or unconsciously taken on board by teachers. When they're overridden by compulsion, those differences disappear. As Tom pointed out on PISA, you've got girls going around saying they can't do maths. They're scoring 100%. Does it matter whether they think they can't do maths if they're scoring 100%? Are we better off spending time on something else than trying to boost self-esteem, which is actually delivering results for them? These are questions I want us to discuss, and I'm going to start by asking you now to start discussing them. Let's take those two first. Shall we start with engagement? Who thinks what I've just said is complete and total nonsense, and who thinks that that's right? Is it worth spending time getting boys to engage more heavily? Anybody? Sorry, one of the things I should say before we start is this is a seminar. It's not a question and answer. We are joined by a number of our speakers, and including Jessica Rowson on the far end from the Institute of Physics, that's done quite a lot of work on women, particularly in STEM, girls and STEM. But this is a seminar. This is a discussion. It is not a question and answer forwards and backwards from here forwards. If you have something to say, say it. And if you want to say something to somebody else in the audience, simply do it through the chair and talk to them. It's not a toing and froing kind of thing. Yes, madam.
I'm just wondering that when boys are more engaged, whether assessment is failing them, so that their results aren't reflecting their engagement and their learning. So is the problem in assessment rather than, and I totally agree that being engaged is a great thing, because learning is not just about going through the hoops, it's also enjoying your learning. But is assessment geared to measure boys accurately? Well,
no, I think that's a perfectly fair point.
Wondering about that.
Perfectly fair point. But that sort of implies that the kind of assessment they're having in Mauritius and the kind of assessment they're having in Australia are either fundamentally different, so they're measuring two different things, because you've got two sets of engagement. Interesting question. Perhaps somebody from Australia will send us an email telling us what that's like. So the second question that I raised there is about preferences. And should we be spending our time on how students prefer to learn when, if you've got some form of compulsion that they have to learn, it overrides those preferences anyway. And I think this feeds into what Nick was saying, what the Cambridge English team was saying there, on motivation. These people are immensely motivated to achieve a particular score to go on to do something else, as a result of which the gender gap seems to narrow really quite dramatically. Compare that with the scores on learning French or Spanish in England, where you still have a gender gap. Clearly, is the motivating factor missing? We're back to engagement and motivation, or is something else happening? You're all the experts, you tell me. Yes, Tim, you can. Oh no, sorry. Let's have Jessica.
Okay, sorry, going back to the first question, actually, talking about engagement of boys, it's actually quite interesting. Some work that we've been doing is obviously looking at why sort of girls don't choose science. And to most people's eyes, girls look very sort of engaged with science. They're in the lessons, they're behaving very, very well. They're kind of, they're doing their work, they're getting the grades. However, they're not opting to do science. So in fact, the fact that they're looking engaged in the lesson doesn't actually to say that they're actually identifying themselves with it. So the question is, are both boys and girls not being engaged by the education system? That's a quite, yeah.
That's immensely depressing, isn't it? Yes, sir, at the back.
Saville is my name, from Walton High at Milton Keynes. There is no doubt that if boys are well engaged, their attainment will go up. And we've seen this in classrooms from time to time. And one example I'd like to quote for physics is the use of PHET, which is a website with a lot of animations for students. And you see the students are drawn into the lessons, and then there are games to test them. And that is how they learn. And if we go the way they learn, it seems we're able to engage them more, and their attainment will go up.
Thank you very much, which takes us rather neatly into boy-centred pedagogy, doesn't it? Down here, are you going to follow up on that point? Yes, thank you. And then, yes, and I'm going to come back.
Just to follow up on engaging boys.
Sorry,
I'm Claudia Pickford-Smith from Cambridge International Exams. I just wonder if there's anything that we could look at where we've heard that boys' performance in maths is, possibly a little bit better than girls' performance in maths, and that boys also spend an awful lot of time online gaming. What is it about the online gaming that's attracting the boys? What is it? What are they actually doing there? As far as I can gather from 2 teenage boys in my household, they tell me they're playing very complex strategic games that require a lot of chess-like moves, for example, incredibly competitive and goal-orientated. Seems to answer to all the the kind of gender prejudices that we attach to boys, but it has engaged them. Is there any way that we can engage boys more with more, as you were talking about, interactive strategies?
Nick, did I see your hand? Yes.
I did. Yes, I think, the point we've been making about learning a language, at least learning a language to the level where you could use it, for example, to study through the medium of that language, cannot be done without engagement. I mean, whether you're a boy or a girl, you have to engage on an endeavor which takes many years. You have to spend a lot of time concentrating on your task, the notion of persistence, not just concentration, and you have to be prepared to recognize that it's a long-term endeavor, so to invest a lot of your time in it. If it matters to you, you will put in the effort. What we find in schooling across Europe, for example, we did a survey in 2011, is that despite the investment that schools put in, and despite the fact people are actually learning English, which is highly motivating in one level, schools are not actually succeeding in engaging their learners adequately because they have, 40 kids in a box. It's not a motivating model for learning a language. So if you could gamify the language learning task, you might be able to engage them, to spend the time, to engage with the learning objectives and keep on doing it. And it would be and it would also have the advantage of breaking out of the box, connecting what you do in school with what you do at home. These are the sort of tactics that are going to be needed if the majority of students in schooling are going to actually reach the language levels they need in English, because it's now a basic skill. So, even when people are motivated, we still have to find ways to ensure that they engage.
Yes, I don't think I was arguing against engaging students. I was arguing, is this the best use of a teacher's time? Are there other ways to address the gender imbalance than through making sure boys are more engaged.
Everybody needs to be engaged.
Everybody needs to be engaged, exactly. Well, can I ask, Cambridge English Language has done quite a lot of gamification. The Monkey, I seem to remember, is an app, is that right? That one can use to learn at quite a young age. Do you have any information on whether that's mostly used by boys, mostly used by girls, or is that not?
Off the top of my head, I don't. I do know that typically boys like the kind of computer game model, as we saw in some of the other data. But how can you persuade girls that that's a useful approach as well? I don't know. I don't have the data to answer that question.
Okay.
Not to hand.
One of the earliest questions that came from Croatia was whether the gender of the teacher was important, and everybody in the audience breathed out at that point. So I'm going to assume we've all got something to say about whether the gender is important or not. When we had a discussion on